Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the second season of the Umuco Podcast.
We're super excited.
Very excited. And today we are talking with Pardeep Kaleka.
Yes.
Yeah. He is what they would describe as brothers with Arno Michaelis, the first person that we interviewed in season 1.
Yeah. Season 1, episode 1, Arno.
Yeah.
Check
season
it out.
2, episode 1, Pardeep, is also an incredible one. Their journey, kind of how their paths crossed, is special. And it started through pain and heartache, but grew into a brotherhood. Mm-hmm. So he talks about that a little bit, but also just who he is and why he is the way he is. Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about forgiveness. Because, and I'm not sure if it was made incredibly clear in the interview, but just to be clear, Pardeep and Arno's paths had crossed when Pardeep's father was killed in a Sikh temple in
Milwaukee.
It
was August 5th.
August 5th, 2012. There was a shooter who is a part of a hate group, white nationalist group, that Arno had previously been a part of and I think started, right?
He was the leader of that group. Yeah. Even though in late 90s he quit.
During groups. At the time, 2012, Arno had been far removed from that.
Far removed, but he felt so guilty of the group that he was the leader for. He started, that's where the person who killed Pardeep's dad was coming from. So he felt like shame, and he wanted to be part of Pardeep's healing journey. Which I find incredibly inspiring because Pardeep is the one who reached out to Arno. Yeah.
Well, we're not going to spoil
what he has to say. We're not going to say much, but
yeah, it's an inspiring story, and Pardeep is an incredibly smart man. He's a therapist as well, so we kind of got like a free therapy session while talking with him
about that.
We did, yeah. Still waiting on that invoice to come through. But please enjoy this episode as we kick off season 2.
Season 2, everybody, with Dydine, Umunyana, and...
Just let it end.
Okay, the end.
Oh, okay.
So, Pardeep, our first question is, you moved to the United States at the age of 6, very young. Do you have memories back home?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have. So I moved here when I was 6. Moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This was in the early '80s, and Milwaukee was very much a different place than it is now. Over the years, we've been hit hard by just a lot of manufacturing jobs who have left town, and I think that's a lot of just urban cities. And during the 1980s, I mean, Milwaukee was really a thriving hub of manufacturing jobs. And so that's why we kind of moved here. But when we did, I was just kind of formulating my memories at that time. So 6 years old, my brother's 4 years old. My mom was a relatively young mother, and my father, so for us, there was a lot of just getting used to and formulating memories once we got here. Yeah. But you obviously have a few memories, but they're not like concrete memories, if that makes sense. They're like kind of like, they come and they go, and you remember like parts of, we used to have this thing called a tubal, and a tubal, like pretty much like in farms, you would take a bath out in the tubal, and everybody was it was like a little mini swimming pool. Wasn't too big, but for us when you're kids, and you can like bathe together and be in this little tubal with like a little pump thing, the water, so water comes out of the well, and so that was one of my most fond memories when I was young, when I came over here. And I think even early on, my parents used to give me baths and kind of like the washer and dryer sink, like the bigger ones. So I kind of like, it was, you reminisce about those days, but not too many memories. But I've been back since I've been here, and I think that helped to solidify some memories of just a vagueness of what you remember about the farm and where things were.
Yeah.
Just within children, they're formulating their memories at that time. But I remember, like, most of my memories came in when I was in the States already.
Oh, how old were you when you went back?
When I went back the first time, I was about 15, 16 years old.
Oh,
And so my mom's father had passed, and so my grandfather, and we went back there to just pay our respects. And at that time, I mean, a lot of people would say, "Do you remember me?" You have aunts and uncles be like, "Do you remember me? Do you remember me? You remember I was your auntie?" And I'm like,
No.
I had no idea. But
they try to pull the like, "Oh, I haven't seen you since you were this big." I'm like, I don't remember you at all.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But then over time, you kind of like, smells are one of those things that comes back quicker than other things.
Right.
And so your senses,
Yeah.
you might not have it here in your like sort of your intellect,
Yeah.
but it's somewhere there, and you smell. And sometimes like family smells a certain way. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not saying like a bad smell, but a comforting smell.
Right. Vaguely familiar, right?
Yeah, so that was that was kind of, and then I've been back there a few times after that as an adult, and I've taken my children back. So all four of my children have been back there, and my daughter she's a little bit older, so she's been back there a couple times.
Yeah.
She definitely has like the language skills, the sort of the cultural understanding too, so she understands some of the nuances. And for my boys, they're a little bit younger. You tell them, can you speak Punjabi or can you speak like Urdu? And they'll be like Punjabi. Like they have no idea what it is. So yeah, it's super interesting to watch them. But hopefully, I think next year, after COVID-19, we'll try to go back and sort of concrete some memories of what India looks like to them.
Right. Right. All right. Moving here at 6 years old, you like you said, you started your life. What was it like culturally for you and your family to sort of like integrate yourself into this new world, right? In Milwaukee, like, was it difficult for you growing up? Was there anything that kind of pops up in your mind as like a definitive experience, for you, your own experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question, Alex. Growing up, and I don't remember it being difficult because, when you get used to the soup that you exist in, you just think it's normal. So, I mean, like a lot of times I think, as I was reading your book, Dydine, and then I was going back to your life, and as tragic as everything is, I think sometimes our brain just gets used to whatever you're existing in. And it's like somebody else, they'd be like, oh, that's, but to me, it was just normal to kind of be this. And when we came, there wasn't a lot of Punjabi or Sikh families in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Right.
I would say there's maybe just about 5. And so there wasn't even like a subculture of going to the temple or, I didn't really make my first Indian friends, Punjabi friends, until I got to college at Marquette University.
Oh, wow.
And so growing up, there's, and there was somebody who described the role of an observer. And I think that for me growing up, I took on the role of an observer quite a bit of like, I'm navigating this culture and I'm moving around quite a bit. We moved around from like apartment to apartment to apartment to apartment.
Right.
And like I said, like Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 70s was just a thriving hub of manufacturing. You could graduate high school, get a good paying job, buy a house on one salary.
Oh, wow.
Like that was Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
Way
in the 70s. And in the 80s, a lot of the manufacturing huge companies that were there just started to leave town. And as they started to leave town, they left a huge vacuum for just, people being unemployed. It was such a good industry that some people could lose their job one day, and then the next day they would know they would have a job at another manufacturing company.
Oh, wow.
That's
like that.
Like they would just, there was like that type of environment. Yeah. So job security. And at that time, really, like families were thriving, white families, black families, Latino families. I mean, the family structure was really just intact in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we came here kind of like when that was starting to not be that way. And we started to see in the 80s and 90s, we started to see like drugs start to hit the street. And as you started to see drugs and the illegal economy sort of taking the place of those manufacturing jobs, you started to see crime escalate. And so, you know, you were trying to move around to try to find safe neighborhoods, and everybody was playing this game of like, what neighborhood's bad, what neighborhood's good, what neighborhood's turning bad. Right. Okay, let me try to keep beating that, but still stay in a place where we didn't have to pay a lot of rent because, you know, we didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so that was really like my upbringing was never really rooted in like stability for a long time. And then finally, when we bought our first house on the south side of Milwaukee, then finally there was a place to say, okay, like this is our house,
right?
And we know we're going to be here. But before that, it was really moving from neighborhood to neighborhood. You know, sometimes you were, you know, and really like you were, you know, at that time, I knew I wasn't black enough to be black. I knew I wasn't white enough to be white. Wasn't Latino enough to be Latino. Wasn't anything enough to be anything. So you just oftentimes you like the cultures that you were, you know, were playing a role in who you were becoming, you know, later on in life. That would be a great gift for me. But at that time when you're trying to fit in, it sucks because hard. All you want to do is like be part of something, be part of some clique, be part of some club.
But then you have to explain yourself.
But later on, I mean, that, you know, that's I talk about this, but later on I got to be myself. And myself, for anybody now, they're like, that's dope. That's awesome. You get to be yourself. Like, who gets to be their self in these days, right?
So
yeah. And we actually just did a video talking about like identity, and kind of what you're talking about, growing up through adolescence, not really knowing where you fit in, and then, you know, that being sort of like a turning point for you to look inward and be like, this is who I am, and it's up to me to live that way to the best of my abilities.
Yeah, and I was driven by like that for before I knew, you know, sometimes you just know that certain times you're just driven by something else. And it's like this introspection that you're forced to do, not because you know it or want to do it, or even, but I think like some people call it meditation, some people call it something else, but it's a deep introspection that you can do. And it's like later on, if you know who you are, nobody can really move you or maneuver you, right? And now what we want to do is we want to teach youth and teens to say, how do you find that self? Not the identity self. I mean, and not to say that identity doesn't play a big role in people's lives. Not to say that skin color is not important. Not to say ethnicity, language, and all these, you know, things that are not important. But know thyself. Right.
Pardeep, so growing up as a child of an immigrant, and you saw your family juggle around, you know, trying to make it here in America for you guys. Most immigrant families, they're really, really working hard for their kids to live a beautiful life that most of them never had the chance to experience. What was your biggest dream? What was the dream you just made after you found yourself, or even before? What was your biggest dream to live the American dream, to accomplish?
Well, just like as I was growing up and I was watching my parents.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Growing up and watching my parents, you know, so language is a difficult thing for a first generation immigrant, and sometimes even nuances of culture, nuances of sort of respect of elders are lost sometimes within the Western world. And you start to see, and you're like, holy cow, like these children, they question their parents. And something, you know, not to say that's good or bad or anything that like equates, value to it. But when you're growing up and you're not able to question your parents, you're not able to say, so you observe again, and you're seeing, and it was never lost on me how hard my parents were working. And they were gone all the time. And, we moved around, and so we moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to North Carolina. North Carolina was just a different environment. As we moved down there, again, like for manufacturing jobs, Dad was trying to find a job at a plant in North Carolina. He found a job. We didn't like it there. So we came back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But this time he decides, he's like, I'm not going to go to a manufacturing job. I'm going to try to start my own business. And so he starts his own business. And, we started off with a mechanic shop which we converted into a convenience store. Yeah. And I just remember just watching them and this is before the codes and inspecting code. You could do some of the work yourself. Yeah. So it was sometimes me, Dad, my brother, just kind of helping out and trying to fix everything up. Mm-hmm. When you don't have a lot of money, you just try to do whatever you can yourself. And I think just watching them hustle to make it in life and make a reality out of this American dream that people have. And then obviously August 5th being told, and I think there's a lot of people within our country that are being told that they're not entitled the American dream. So you can work as hard as you want. You even have to outwork people, just to kind of have the same shot at it. Right. Yeah. And dare you not fail. Right. Dare you not, it's if you fail, you never know if you're going to have that shot. So oftentimes when we talk about issues of privilege, we talk about issues of entitlement, we talk about all of these issues. We're talking about the sense of I have to do it. I have to succeed. Right. And I not only have to succeed because for me, but I have to succeed for the generations, the lineage, all the ancestors, right? Yeah. Everything that has sacrificed for you to even have a shot, right? A small shot, let you not fail, right? And that's how much pressure that I think sometimes we put on ourselves. Yeah. Maybe we can't fail, maybe we can fail, but in our mind, it's ingrained in I feel like I have so watching them kind of go through all of this, that was never, so the translation part of it, them giving me advice was difficult for them to do. Mm-hmm. So their advice came by showing, and their advice came by don't ever give up.
Yeah. Oh. Right. But I mean, and that eventually led to law enforcement, right?
How did that happen?
Yeah, what's that story?
How did that happen?
How did law enforcement happen?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, so going to school, I was I think I was over at Whitewater at this time, and Whitewater was a smaller college in middle Wisconsin, and then I transferred to Marquette. And why that happened was, have you guys ever seen the movie Bad Boys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Will Smith and Martin Lawrence.
Yeah.
I watched that movie way too many times, and I was like, "Oh man, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life."
Oh wow!
I want to be like Will Smith.
Yes.
I want to be like Martin Lawrence, and part of it was honestly the sort of, I don't know, when you're growing up in a society, and as much as I would like to say that growing up and not being part of those things didn't hurt me at all. As a boy, you sometimes do. You're kind of hurt. Mm-hmm. And as a boy, when you don't have a lot of power, what you want is power. Mm-hmm. And so when we see people who are stronger than us, people that do have this bravado, and then you're kind of like, man, I don't know what it is, but I want that.
Yeah.
I want to feel like the world is not just happening to me, but the world is happening for me.
Right.
Mm. It seemed like when you watch Bad Boys, it's like, man, no matter what kind of situation they were in, right? They knew how to turn it around and make the world happen for them. Mm-hmm. And the other part was really, I was driven by this sense of right and wrong, and good and bad, and I thought that back then, I'm like, okay, if I want to keep good people safe, I can lock up bad folks. Mm. And you sometimes the simple mind thinks that way of black and white,
right,
and dialectics, right? And the older you get, you realize that it's not that simple. There's a whole lot of gray.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of people compensating for a sense of power. Mm-hmm. And I would say, especially men. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of situations where, community and police and most of the negative altercations are between men.
Yeah.
And there's something to do with power, and power is, and now, as a 44-year-old father of 4 and going through a lot of this, just what we've gone through, I can tell you that the only real power is compassionate power. It's power to be compassionate, power to like say, okay, like you're not going to move me. Power to say, okay, like how do I forgive and live and nurture, and how do I fix and heal rather than, and some things are worth destroying, but how do I always keep my mind in a place of, that teaching that power is actually, trying to heal and trying to fix. So,
Yeah.
but that, honestly speaking, back in those days, I wouldn't have known all those things. So I get into policing because one, you feel powerful.
For bad boys.
Number two, yeah, it's like saying, okay, let's lock up the bad folks.
Yeah.
Was there a moment that you remember, like an experience you had there that helped you rethink of the reasons why you're in there and refocus your career path to education? Because I know that's where your love and passion is.
So as far as like one moment, it'd be tough to say, just say one moment, but over my 5 years of policing, and I was policing in one of the roughest parts of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Right. This like the where I was policing is, it was nicknamed Little Beirut when I first came out, and it's been hit hard by, just policies around redlining, policies around just housing and employment, and just years of it's really just a tough area to be for children, for adults, and so I was policing there, and on a day-to-day basis, you would just see, and I knew it at the time. I'm like, okay, this is not me spiritually. This is not. I don't feel like clinking a person up. I feel like there's something we can do before this person needs to be clinked up. And you would go to situations. You would see people, but at the same time, you just be like, there's a part of me that was just like, this is not right for me.
Right.
And I do have a deep respect for police officers. I think that the career of policing needs to be reformed completely. I think that we need to rethink what role police have within our society, and really, I mean, we do have to invest in just preemptive and preventative care. So that's kind of where my mind and my spirit was when I was policing. And I became a teacher in the same neighborhood that I was policing.
Oh, wow.
It was important for me to start working with at-risk, what the state labeled at-risk high school youth. And that's really where my heart was. And I would still be doing that if not for the shooting on August 5th, 2012, because I loved working with the youth. I loved working with high school youth. A lot of people had difficulty with a lot of these youth. They're like, oh, this one's disrespectful, or that one is, truant, or this one is doing that. I'm like, man, my 12 years of teaching, I didn't have to suspend one child. I didn't have to suspend one person because of bad behavior or anything like that. And oftentimes I just got to know them. I'm like, hey, just, what's your story? Like, where who takes care of you? Who like you live with grandma, you live with mom, you live with mom and dad, what kind of, who can I call? And I would always try to find some soft spot that I can maneuver them with. Right. And I'd be like, hey man, like, you acting up. I know grandma, 80, when she would not like that. And they'd be like, how do you know my grandma? And they don't know, they talked about it, but I remember that. And so I always had a connection.
Right.
And so you don't have to suspend, you don't have to do all these things if you truly have connection as an educator. Right. But right now, I don't think that's a skill that's taught.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say, my dad was a police officer. So, I mean, I have stories, and we've also talked about this on the podcast as well. So I definitely have a particular perspective towards that. But also teaching. I substitute taught for a year. So I think I have another perspective. I mean, little, but I still understand that when you're, interacting with these kids who what would be labeled as at risk, the first thing that a lot of people do is approach them and treat them with this moniker at risk, right? So you go at a different angle, and they can sense that you're just another teacher, you're just another person who is treating me a certain way based off of whatever, but they're human. And so when you approach them like another human and try your best to relate to them and just, treat them on an equal level instead of treat them like a fragile little eggshell, then it's crazy what sort of positive growth can come from both of you.
Yeah. And I used to have, I had kids that, they had records, they had all kinds of stuff, right? And these were the kids that were like kicked out of Milwaukee public schools. These were the kids that Milwaukee public schools basically they could not handle. And then you would get them and you sit down with them and what was crazy, like this is the crazy part, right? I'm being completely honest. When I would ask for homework, and I know like they would have a rough weekend. I know that like sometimes, it just like things that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. I mean, from food to sleeping to taking care to sexual abuse to sexual assault to physical violence some of them are choosing between being being hurt or being homeless.
Right.
Like that was their decision, right? And here I am asking them about history homework. Here I am asking about like some kind of assignment, right? And I knew all this at the time, right? I knew this, and I asked them for it, and the student would be like, "Here you go, Mr. Kaleka, I got it finished," and it blew my mind. Like, right, it would blow my mind, and I wouldn't tell them. I wouldn't tell the students because I wanted them to keep, like, you kind of have some tough love with it,
right?
And they would but they would know that I valued that. They would know that I appreciated that about them, that they had gone through all of this and still they got their homework done.
Right.
And I was like, man, the human spirit is so strong in these kids.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like, I'm supposed to be there to teach you. I'm supposed to be there to be strong for you. You just showed me how strong the human will could be. Yeah. And sometimes we talk about faith and we talk about God and we talk about religion and we talk about all these things. These kids embodied it. They embodied it and they still do. On a day-to-day basis, there's kids that are going through the worst of the worst, and their spirit is still alive.
Right.
They don't give up. And so when August 5th, 2012 happened, and a white supremacist took 7 lives and took his own life, I was lucky enough to have the strength of these children with me.
That's the sort of thing that you have to, I don't know, you just think about, and you don't realize how stuff like that can resonate with you. I mean, like, you were the teacher, you were there as the instructor, but here are these kids who teach you lessons that you may not have otherwise had the opportunity to learn.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I watch kids, man. I watch kids all the time. I watch my own kids. I'm like, man, I just, one of my favorite things, and I had to take a psychological evaluation to get this last position. And they said, man, you tested off the charts on a few things. And one of the things that I tested the highest on was just understanding people. And I was like, man, I've been doing this my whole life.
Right.
I've been trying to understand people. When I was a cop, I was trying to understand people, maybe a little bit about like survival, but like I'm understanding these kids. I just like to watch people maneuver the experience of their life.
Right.
So yeah, it was. I mean, I honestly when I went back to school, went back to teaching after the shooting, and just was grateful to be able to be in their presence.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot August 5th, 2012, and it's a moment in your life where I feel like it's that moment where almost everything changes. You start seeing life differently, and you've written it in your book, and it's the gift of wounds, especially when you're talking about those kids. They have these wounds, but also they're using them as gifts. They're like, this life is an opportunity. We have to live it, no matter what. And they will still come with the homework that you gave them. They would do it. And despite all the craziness that's happening in their own lives. And I can see myself in those kids, literally. Like, I'm like, you're talking about them in the classroom, I'm thinking about them home.
Yeah.
Because that's pretty much what was my life growing up. And I had that in me that I have to live. I have to be able to live like everybody else. And that's probably the strength that got me where I am right now. And I learned it from other people that were going through hardship. And then for you, you experienced loss in August 5th, that the person that you died, the person that, raised you, sacrificed everything for you. And but then the strength of those kids, can you share a little bit and your strength and what you learned from it?
Sure. I mean, the strength of those kids, the strength of my, growing up and, having friends that nurtured you, care for you. I think I've been blessed by just a huge sacred community that, a beloved community that has genuinely has raised a 6-year-old immigrant kid to come to America. And sometimes we just got to be grateful for those that are around us. I think a lot of times we lose track of that, and we lose track of and we take for granted all of the people that have nurtured our spirit. And I think that was at that time on August 5th. I didn't know it, right? I didn't, because that day honestly was very confusing. It was very if my daughter had not forgotten that book, I don't want to have to think what a father could have, if a father could have saved their 2 children. I would love to say that I would have and could have, but you never know. You never know how people are going to respond.
Yeah.
But luckily, she forgot that book. We turned around. I didn't have to make that decision, but that haunted me for a long time. That sometimes what haunts you the most is what could have happened, not what happened. And so I think part of that was there. Part of it was I was bitter at law enforcement at the time because I felt like it took them a long time to get inside. And I thought to myself, if these folks, that were inside, if it was a church full of a white congregation,
right,
would they have made it more of a priority? Did they not? I mean, did it take them an hour because we were low priority? And so you wrestle with those feelings, and you wrestle with anger and frustration and all of that, and you're honest with it. I don't think that you can get anywhere, get truly to a healthier place unless you're honest with your feelings and your emotions. And luckily that I knew that I also had an obligation or responsibility. I had responsibility to the Sikh community that was inside. I also had responsibility to the outside community, because I didn't want that the shooter's lasting effects of trauma would be the remembering, the remembrance of this. Yeah. I was like, no, you're not. Evil is not going to win today,
right?
Right. And I'm not saying that I'm sure that he was. When I say that, evil, is a spiritual thing. It's not. So some people have it within them. Sometimes in society and policies and systems have it within it. So when we're saying evil, we're talking about that part of somebody that just wants to hurt somebody, cause harm. Right. And I wasn't going to let that be the lasting effects. So really, right away, I knew that I needed to tend to our community, make sure that they were all right. Mm-hmm. So we started a GoFundMe to help the families financially, and then we raised I think 300-some thousand for those 6 families, and then that split it up like 50,000 each. They could lease. They lost their main breadwinner. Mm-hmm. So I knew that they had to pay rent. They had to have food. They had to pay for funerals and all these things. So took care of the logistics of really just that. Mm-hmm. And then, and then the broader community, and then saying, okay, here's who we are. It gave us an incredible opportunity to say who Sikhs are, what we stand for. Right. So within and this is not to just be cliche, but behind obstacles are opportunities, right? Yeah. How are we navigating that and getting to a better place and making it much less likely that something like this ever happens to any other community. Right. And so I knew that if we took this tragedy and transformed it into something that was super positive, the next person who was out there watching and looking wouldn't do that to another community, because they'd be like, man, the last thing an evil, suffering, right, person wants to happen is for a community to be like, word, you did that, cool. Okay, now watch how our community comes together.
Right.
Watch how we get embraced by the American, sort of like culture, and we become part of America.
Right.
And that was really the mission of saying, okay, I need these children not to be traumatized for the rest of their life. I need them to go out and be nurses and be officers and be productive citizens. If they're scared in their own temple walls, they'll never be that. And it was so, I mean, that was a lot of the inspiration at that time. But at the same time, going through it, you're still suffering from a lot of that anger. You're still frustrated. You're still personally, right? You're gritting your teeth and you're like in front of a camera, like, yeah, we're doing great.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all good.
It's tough. No. And
because you have to be the leader, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna bring up, because at one point you had said, I had read that you said that you looked at this as post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress. And what you just described there, coming together with your community and not letting the shooter's last actions have a long-lasting effect, with hatred and just anger, and then turning it into something powerful and a lot of strength.
Yeah, I think the post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress, as I was going through a lot of that stuff, and just personally, you come home and you'd be tired, because you're like dealing with interviews, you're dealing with doing this and doing that, and outside of my job and raising a family. And I remember one of the secure places was next to my kids, by their beds, and I would just sit there for a long time and sit there and kind of like watch them sleep, or and part of me was like, what's going on? Why am I spending so much time? And I was talking to my brother, and I was like, hey, I'm just spending a lot of time just watching the kids sleep. I'm just sitting there, next to their bed. It's like, it feels nice to be in their bedroom. And I'm like, I think I'm going through this post-traumatic stress, right? Hypervigilance and all this stuff. And he's like, do you appreciate your life more than you did before? I'm like, yeah, I do, man. Like death, coming close to death will make you appreciate things that you wouldn't have before. And he's like, you appreciate being around those kids much more? Like, I'm like, yeah, I do. And he's like, yeah, you are going through post-traumatic stress, but at the same time, you're going through post-traumatic growth, because you're not taking for granted the gifts that you have in your life.
Right.
God gives us all kinds of things, and oftentimes we take them for granted, and we really got to come to a place where we're like, and then I think my life, our family's life, was in that place that we had a good sort of middle class suburban lifestyle by that time. We thought that was like, okay, we made it, right? We can take a vacation whenever we want.
Right.
And I think that part of you, when you do that, is you just take things for granted, especially the mission that you have here on earth.
Right.
And we all have a divine mission. All of us. And I think that sometimes people like, Pardeep, what's happiness? Or what's sadness? And oftentimes they assume that I'm going to say something like, well, sadness is like something bad happening to you, or happiness is like something good happening for you, right? But it's not that, because bad things and good things happen to people all the time.
Yeah.
And sadness and happiness is our state of being. But the state of being of happiness is that, and everybody has clues within their life. They're all around, they're abundant, right? And they're telling you, okay, go this way.
Yeah.
Alex, go this way. Dydine, you go this way, right? And happiness means that you're following those subtle clues, which are leading you to whatever your divine mission or purpose is supposed to be in this lifetime. Sadness is when you consciously ignore it, when you're like, or subconsciously, because it's not convenient, because it's something that's like, that would take me away from my middle class lifestyle. Right. My 401k would suffer. My this thing or that thing would suffer, right? And that's sadness. Yeah. And people don't know that they're living with it. Or some people they know. Some people are just like, I'm depressed. Like what is that? Depression is a state of being. Depression is you not having like sort of this inspiration to not fall asleep that night and to like wake up the next day and excited as hell about life, because we've taken things for granted.
Right.
And it's diagnosed much more in the United States than other places because we have kind of this privilege of doing that, of saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to live this super linear life where I go to work 9 to 5, come home, repeat it and do it. And it's like, when did we do that? Why did we do this?
Why? Right.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy that you described it as linear because, and I wasn't going to bring it up,
Anyway.
but now I am. So I'm not sure if you've ever read this book called Many Lives, Many Masters by a guy named
we have to send it to you.
Brian Weiss.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I just finished reading this book a few days ago. My favorite book so far in my life. And kind of what you're talking about. Yeah, because it talks about a lot of stuff, but one thing that you kind of just hit upon was like knowing your purpose and happiness versus sadness. And you can feel, I feel, like you know what you're supposed to do subconsciously. Like you can feel it. And when you decide to live a very linear lifestyle because it's convenient or it's because what other people are doing, sometimes it may be in alignment with what you're supposed to do, but a lot of times it's not. It's out of alignment. And then you can feel these very subtle things that you just know, like I should be doing this. And once you decide to make that move and do what you're supposed to do in life, life will be a lot more happier. And it's a simple thing, but it can be hard to kind of wrap your mind around it.
Yeah.
And I tell people, I said, we all live in jail cells of our own making. And really the gift of these wounds where I think that I felt it all along in my life, right? You, as a small child, you just felt like, and I used to ask my mom, like, Mom, there's got to be something else that we're meant to do besides run these gas stations and make money and give people cancer. And she'd be like, boy, you just got convenient. You can say that now, right? You don't know how. So I'm like, I got to accept that. I got to, okay, fine. But you know that there's something that like wasn't right. And I knew that. I'm like, when this happened, it was like God just taking slapping the mess out of me and be like, hey, you've done a lot, you've done good, but you haven't done enough.
Right.
That's what you're actually supposed to be doing. And so all of us, we exist in these, and then really like liken it to, the prisoner on death row, and he's about to be sentenced to the electric chair the next day. And the warden comes up to him and is basically like, okay, hey, you got one of two options today. You can, I'll give you whatever you want. I can make it real convenient tonight. And tomorrow you can take the electric chair, or you can take that door over there. And the prisoner asked the warden, is like, what's behind the door over there? And the warden's like, all of your fears, your worst fears. And the prisoner's like, okay, well, let's just make it convenient tonight, and I'll accept my punishment, and I'll just die tomorrow.
Oh, I would.
And then so the prison guard comes up to the warden, and it was like, the other guard comes up to the warden the next day, and she's like, what was behind the door over there, warden? And the warden's like, freedom.
Wow.
Freedom.
Wow.
Yeah.
And our freedom is behind some of those fears. And sometimes you will actually see other people's freedom because, when blind spots are happening to us, some people are naive to the blind spots that they have in their own personal life.
Right.
So family members, think about friends, think about people that shouldn't be living the existence that they're living. And you can see it, but yet they either, because they don't want to see it, because it's inconvenient to them, because they just have existed in that soup so long that that's normal, right? And they die the next day, we die eventually, right?
Yeah.
Right? They never really truly had freedom.
Oh.
And it's a frustrating feeling for you when you see it in people, and you're like, holy cow. And you have to bite your tongue because you can't say it all. You can't say it all the time. Be like, hey, listen, if you could just get past that heartache and that heart loss, that, whatever happened to you, you could be free. Right. And so that's when people ask me, like, what does forgiveness look like? Forgiveness looks like freedom. Forgiveness looks like vengeance. Yeah. Forgiveness looks like a reclamation of your own personal power to be your complete self. come back to that.
Yeah.
And somehow, some way, they hold it ransom. And I was at a meeting the other day, and somebody was holding something ransom. I'm like, bro, you don't want to like hold that ransom. You don't want to, like, this is not what you want to do.
This is not part of the questions we were planned, but you mentioned forgiveness, and it's a big topic, especially in my community, in genocide survivors community, and we quite don't understand forgiveness as a whole. And I would like for you to talk about, like, to tell us about forgiveness from a survivor's point of view, which
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a deep, the forgiveness is such a difficult thing to prescribe, right? And I say this, as a clinician, I'll say this: the difference between giving you a prescription or giving you or letting you participate, right? And so typically when I'm doing therapy with somebody, I want them to participate. I know that a prescription is also good too, because here's the thing: the efficacy of giving a prescription and giving and doing psychotherapy merge together, have a lot of like efficacy, but the more effective part are people participating, because a prescription can only last you so long, and then you have to up the milligrams, right? And then if you just do that, then you get used to it. And sometimes, within the faith world, I call it like, I'm like, okay, the preacher is giving you a prescription. Unless you yourself are participating in it, now the preacher starts to make sense. Now the lesson, the Bible makes sense. The Quran makes sense, right? Because you're like, oh, wow, that's what was actually being talked about.
Right.
So forgiveness, I think I cannot prescribe it. I think that somebody has to participate in that process themselves. And so then it becomes much more real to them what it is. And I'll tell you this. Like when I was working with sexual assault survivors, and oftentimes this conversation would happen where they would talk about it. And sometimes, there was single incident sexual assault survivors. There was those that were sexually assaulted by family members repeatedly. There were those who were sexually assaulted by family members from a very young age so different levels of where people were. Sometimes it was men who were, assaulted by an uncle. So I mean, this looked different for different things. And here I was working with sexual assault survivors, and I'm like, I've never been sexually assaulted before. What am I going to be able to tell, or what am I going to be able to tell them?
Yeah,
I can't tell anything. So there's a part of me who was wrestling with and then I started to kind of, as we were working with sexual assault survivors, and talking about the concept of forgiveness, and I would let them know, I'm like, my journey is my journey. You're going to have to go on your journey, and I can't tell you what it looks like to you. I can't tell you that it'll look like this and completely like this, but I can tell you that it's a journey that's worth going on. Mm. It's a journey. It's something worth giving a chance. And so I would never want to take it away and say, and it's not about forgetting. Obviously, we know that. Yeah. It's not about just saying, okay, I like, it's not even about the perpetrator. Mm-hmm. Right? It's about that person and how that person comes back to themselves, mm-hmm. whoever they were meant to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that like you said before, children, right? Some children lose that right away. Because they're put into a situation where, that's just, they're not given the time to get to that place of complete self. It takes all of us, but so it's something that is deeply personal to people. But I think that in the Western world, I would like to make it where forgiveness is really something that is a process that we learn early on. In school. I think that we can teach some of these skills. And I think good education right now looks like saying, okay, let's forget the curriculum. Let's forget the standardized tests, because right now we live in a place where information is readily available. Right. Yeah. For 44 years old, we would give an assignment, and so they would say, okay, Pardeep, do something on World War II. And I would go to the library and find 3 books on World War II. And then I would write a 10-page paper. So my job was to expound off of limited resources.
Right.
These kids now have the total, complete opposite issue. They're saying, okay, do a paper on World War II, and they put that into Google, and how many things come up? Now, they don't have 3 books. They got 3 billion sites. I don't know, I'm just making that number up, but a lot of sites that they can go on. So now their whole lens about education has to be completely switched. Mine was saying, okay, let me expound on this. Theirs is to say, now it's to say, what information is good? And typically, what information is good for my soul? Meaning it's credible, meaning that it makes me a better person, more informative, right? And so now, like, education looks like the same as it did 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We're still standardized testing. Right. We're still looking to say, okay, tell me a fact about da-da-da-da-da, right? But what we should be doing, if we want this country and we want, children to work past their issues and work to forgiveness, we want a society to be better, we have to root education around social emotional intelligence. Every school should have classes. If you're a civics teacher, you should be teaching on forgiveness. If you're a math teacher, you should be working towards credibility or what's right, what's research, education just completely needs to be flipped upside down. And really just the barometer of success needs to be how much is it nurturing this person.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That just kind of makes me think, back to my own schooling here, is a lot of the reason why, in my experience, why this stuff that we're forced to memorize and then regurgitate for a standardized test, none of it really stays with us. Not a lot of it anyway. With me especially, I don't remember 80% about what I learned in grade school, high school. I mean, because it wasn't personalized. They didn't make it kind of pertain to me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the Pythagorean theorem. You know what I mean? It's just all this stuff. And now, if you can make this information that we're forced to learn more personal, if you can make it relate to our own individual lives, because a lot of it does, I just think it's just a particular way that you teach it and you approach that whatever lesson that you're trying to teach.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I mean, standardized tests, that's the college entrance exams, all of these things don't really measure a person's resilience. They don't really measure a person's ability to pick themselves up when they get knocked down. So you do see, I see a lot of people who have tested well and have gotten nearly perfect SATs who fail in life because part of who they were and why they got those really good scores on their SATs was because they never wanted to fail. It wasn't as much about being a lifelong learner. It was because I'm so scared of failure that I never want to fail. I don't ever want to get nothing less than an A. I never want to get anything. And so that sometimes to me, when we think about people who are people who are navigating shame and guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And if somebody operates from a shame mechanism, they can typically be very successful in what we call success in life and in grades and school and education.
Right.
But they're the ones that are they're the ones that are least likely to pick themselves up. They're the ones that are overly sensitive to a lot of things. Mm-hmm. They're the internalizers, right? And so when we think about even the shooter in this case, a lot of times people say, well, was the shooter, was he ignorant? Was he stupid? Was he just white supremacist? I'm like, this person was in psychological operations in the military, psych ops, right? He was very smart. Arnold is very smart.
Yeah, Arnold is very smart.
A lot of people who get into some of these sort of radical groups, right, are going through something where they don't feel like they're strong enough. Mm-hmm. They wrestle with a lot of shame. They wrestle with personality types. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not attuned to that, the next person is out there that's going to, be like, okay, I want to get into this because I want to feel powerful. The the whole gun culture and all these things kind of leads to that too. So all of this stuff there, you can see it in video games, you can see it in first person shooter games. When I'm seeing kids and I'm like, okay, they're playing, what's that game? Fortnite, right? And now they're so invested into their character, their avatar. Right? They're in their avatar and they're like, my avatar is everything. My avatar is the greatest. My avatar's, I mean, yeah, but what about you?
Right.
How are you? Yeah, how are you feeling? Did you put all yourself into the avatar? So when somebody kills your avatar, you like, and a lot of that exists within, and I would say even like with men, much more than women. Yeah, it seems like women sometimes can navigate the whole feeling spectrum much better than we can.
I agree. Have a lot of feelings.
I agree. Yeah, and
very emotional.
That's a whole nother tangent that we could go on. But no,
and that's not that's not saying to like. I think all of us have the feminine and the masculine.
Yeah,
we have those spirits inside of us, but I feel like the feminine, the more that guys can be in touch with the feminine, I think it's a completely healthy thing. We need to be in touch, and vice versa. But I think much more like the danger of society right now and mass shooters and all these things is because they're not trying to get in touch with that feeling part of this.
Right. I like to think of that as like, especially with like intelligence, the more like knowledge that you accrue, it's like bricks, right? Like you keep on stacking these bricks, but the thing that kind of holds you together and use it in a positive way is the mortar in between these bricks that helps it stick, that helps it become more of a stronger foundation. I've always sort of like equated it to that.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy, and I mean, you do see a lot of people who are overly intellectual, or and then you see it on social media feeds quite a bit. Yeah. So and then you see somebody and they'll write like a paragraph on like a Facebook post. You're like, man, you just wrote like a book. You wrote a whole book,
right?
Yeah.
And each one of their comments is a complete book. You're like, man, you just so most people have like a couple sentences, but this person every time they comment has like, nobody's reading all that, but they think that the more that they say, right, that's their control mechanism.
Or they will be understood.
I'm going to be overly smart. I'm going to be overly intellectual. I'm going to be and so a lot of times that is a mental health thing too. If I can explain it, then I can get through this trauma.
I see.
So whatever, if they're existing in a PTSD, that symptomology, I look for a couple of things. I look for whether a person is a black and white thinker, if they exist in an us and them attitude, if they use a lot of like we, us, them, they, right, and it's not a lot of ours, or there's there's not shared experiences,
right? But
they're talking about and so you look for that, and you look for people who are like, especially men, who are like overly explaining. Like there's something going on.
And then it can become very accusatory, going back to the they, like the divisive chasm that they create in their verbiage.
Big time. And we started to do a lot of work with police and community over here. And I was at a meeting with as a federal, local, and state law enforcement, community activists, and some politicians. And I walked into the room and I was like, man, and I told them this. I was like, when I walked into this room, you guys are talking at each other. You're not talking to each other. I'm like, first and foremost, realize everybody in this room is here for the same reason. All right, let's just have that foundation. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're not here, but let's assume that everybody's here because they want public safety. They want the public to be safe.
Right.
Start from that foundation. Let's talk to one another rather than just talking at one another. But pretty much everyone was using you people or you guys or you this, or I'm just like, man, if I could have counted the number of times there was like a kind of an us and them statement.
So Pardeep, during your I like your story with Arno, because are you the one who reached out to him, or he's the one who reached out to you?
No, I reached out to him. Yep.
Why did you reach out to him?
Well, so we're doing all this work, doing all this stuff for the community, trying to put a brave face on for the world. But at the same time, I was personally kind of suffering, and I knew it because I was wrestling with this, like, I need to do this for the public, but I don't want to see them see me angry. Mm-hmm. Right? And part of it was shooter was dead. Law enforcement wasn't really telling us what happened in those final moments. I felt like there was a lot of just kind of silence and lack of both, accountability and transparency. I think that's where a lot of people right now is their big issue with even law enforcement, FBI, federal. There's just like a lot of like just lack of accountability, lack of transparency. Right. There's a lot of just so there's almost a feeling of there's a subconscious inferiority, like you're not good enough to get the information, or you're not, whatever that is. Yeah. And so me reaching out to Arnold was really just to kind of ask him, like, hey, did you know this person? Why would somebody like this do this? So it was really, I wanted him to answer a lot of the questions of, like, I wanted him to explain to me, right? We're talking about explanation.
Yes.
And so I was like, somebody needs to explain this. And since the shooter was dead, I'm like, next best person is the person that started that same organization, that same gang that the shooter belonged to. So that was the reason why I reached out to him. And I think just right from the beginning, as we communicated via text, via email, then we decided to meet up in person. I think I wanted the same thing, an explanation. Right. And from the book and the first time that we met, and I encourage everybody to go get the book, The Gift of Our Wounds, so that you can get. But I think this is the part where what we want and what we need are two different things. So what I wanted was an explanation. Yeah. What I got was the experience of brotherhood. Mm-hmm. Oh. Somebody who said, and from the most unlikeliest of people, right. Because there was a lot of people who you would have expected, and oftentimes your own community, right? You would say, well, my community will stand up with me and this is what we'll do. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the people that you expect to come and support you are not the ones that do. Right. And so, and this again, by what you want and what you need, God has a way of putting things in your life of what you need. Mm. And what I needed was somebody to give me the experience of not only brotherhood, but then lovingly challenge me out of where I was at that time. Lovingly challenge and say, okay, here's where you are. Here's where we need to get to. And both of us kind of did that for one another. Because the first time that I met him is not the same Arnold Michaelis that exists now. He was just starting, his transformation and him getting out of the movement and him basically writing this book, and he's trying to become a public speaker, but yet he's wrestling with a lot of feelings of guilt. Right. Of what he'd done to people, where he was guilty about this, where did he start that organization? Was that person inspired by some of his old records that he made? I'm sure that both of them are, lead singers in a band. Mm-hmm. So they probably heard of one another. And so sometimes what you exist in is this guilt of things that you should have done and things that you probably could have done before, but you're like, I don't want to go revisit that. Yeah. And now he had to. So now he has to go revisit that. And as we started to move forward, I just realized, I'm like, man, like I've come back to Arnold and I'm like, man, you've not only been my brother through this, and you told me at the first time we met, you're never going to have to walk this journey alone. Mm. I'll be with you. And at the same time, I'm a clinician. I was like, Arnold, you've been my best therapist. So that's, that is what we should probably start to do for one another too. Yeah. We don't need to be surrounded by people who always agree with, not to say that our suffering is not warranted, not to say that our sadness is not legitimate, but we do need people to sometimes challenge us out of it. Yeah. Right. And to say, and lovingly challenge us out of it, because, you can toxically challenge somebody out of it and be like, that person not moving. No. Yeah, but that was, again, like, first time we met, as everyone can imagine. There's a lot of like just feelings that are happening within us of like, did this person really change? You know, I thought, it's like, do white supremacists change at all? Like, or it's like, you know, white supremacist, once a white supremacist, always a white supremacist. You can't change hate like that. And what I've discovered is, and this is, you know, even with people that other people don't think are going to change, they're like, oh, that's their personality. I'm like, no, not necessarily. I've seen a lot of people change. I've seen a lot of people, and you know, if we want to bring, you know, if you want to bring somebody home, you got to do it through love.
Absolutely.
You really got to do it through love, and then, you know, love can both be an enabler, but I mean, love, you know, that way it was like, okay, I need to bring you home, and I need you, and we both didn't know it at the time, but it was like, we need to go on this journey going forward, and you're going to need to be whole. And as we started to go on this journey, I started to realize it very quickly why that was the case. You know, we would go do a talk at a high school, and this was probably a month after we met, 2 months after we met.
Yeah.
And we went to go do our first talk at a high school nearby where the shooter kind of lived. And this small school had 2 suicides before we got there. And the principal at the school was like, oh, you know, don't say anything about the suicides. And then a week before we got there, there was another suicide. So 3rd suicide in a school year.
Wow.
And, you know, we just kind of like, you know, it's not like us to not say anything. So we said, well, let's creatively figure a way out of this. And then I was like, you know, let's turn the lights off. And I was like, you know, I understand that we all lose people in our life. And, you know, let's take a moment of silence to think about all the people that maybe we have lost in our life, and, you know, pay them respect. And you could hear the crowd, and the crowd is kind of like, there's crying, there's people whimpering. And, you know, you're hearing children go through that. And then we tell our story about Arnold and I. And then after the talk, right, Arnold would take one side of the stage and I would take the other side of the stage. And we would have like 10 kids, all teenagers. I'm suicidal. I want to die. I've tried to commit suicide a week ago. Like, here's how I feel right now. And I can't tell anybody. Here's what, like, I don't like girls. I like boys. I don't like boys. I like girls. Yeah. I can't tell my parents. I want to commit suicide. Like, I was like, man, there's a lot of things that are happening with these kids.
Yeah.
So the hardest part of our job was not the talk. The hardest part was the 2 hours afterwards. And we would oftentimes tell the administrators, go ahead, go to your classrooms, complete the rest of the school day. Yeah. Let these kids sit around and we'll just talk to them. And so I realized if we're not good, right? If we're not grounded, then we're not gonna be able to help these kids.
No.
Wow. And it's because I imagine they felt so comfortable with you two just because you created space for that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it was surprising that 10 kids deep in a line, just, you know, one after the other sharing these very intimate, scary thoughts that I'm sure at that time it was petrifying to bring that up to anybody else. But you two, who, you know, they saw as trusted therapist at that point.
Yeah, and I wasn't, you know, so at that time I wasn't even a therapist. So Arnold and I were not therapists at the time.
Yeah.
Arnold's still not a therapist, but so I think it was the vulnerability, right?
Right.
And early on we decided, we're like, okay, we're never going to rehearse anything. Whatever comes out is God's will. You know, just with the intent of like, let's just be super vulnerable.
Right.
Let's exhibit vulnerability. And somehow, some way, you know, people see body language much more than they like hear what's coming out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. And maybe I think there's something about just presence and just saying, hey, these two are just vulnerable right now and raw. I can be that way too.
Right.
And hopefully, you know, God willing, like some of them, you know, would come up. And this was literally like almost every school. We would have time, because we would even make time then of like, hey, like make it so that you have at least a half hour afterwards. And because we tell them like, you know, we're going to charge so much for a talk. We're going to do this, that. But the hardest part is not going to be the talk. It's going to be afterwards.
Yeah.
So make sure that you got some counselors or somebody else on staff. And we started to like kind of create this sort of mental health approach of doing talks, of not just, so we felt like if we open you up, we should have the responsibility of closing you off too.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's put that into the talks, because you just open somebody up and now they're just thinking about their stuff all night without being able to like touch or say or this or that. So.
Right. That's important. That's another. I've never given talks like that.
I like that you mentioned that, because I go through that a lot, and I am still, when I started at 23 years old, that's when I started giving talks, and my hardest part was after the talks, and I wanted to disappear right after the talk, because like a third time I did talks, the energy from my audience, the crying, and I just felt like I didn't have enough to give after those talks, and I didn't know how to maneuver those experiences. It just became really hard that I started telling the people that I have 30 minutes after the talk, so that I save myself from weeks and weeks of not being able to recover from my talks. So
it is. It's exhausting. It's, by the end of the night, you're just like, you're exhausted. Yeah. But it's a good exhaustion too.
It is.
It's a good feeling of exhaustion. And I think what you can do, Dydine, is like, when you go into those schools, make sure that they have staff that understand your story, and that they understand your journey, and they understand what the kids are going through. So if you can't reach them, at least they have some staff ready to kind of say, okay, like, here's what's going on. They're tuned to it, and talk to people afterwards.
Yeah, now I'm growing older. I'm almost 30, so I'm getting.
By the time you're 40, you're gonna be okay. Yeah, we got this.
Yeah.
But moving forward with that, I mean, as you and Arno formed this friendship, you also birthed this thing that's called Serve to Unite, right?
Yeah.
So can you walk us through a little bit of that and that whole journey?
Sure. So Serve to Unite actually was formed from the Sikh temple, and a lot of youth and a lot of like the younger sort of generation who said, okay, like we're going to take some blame for why people don't know who Sikhs are. Not for the shooting itself, but why people don't know who Sikhs are, because we're not in the broader community enough. We don't, we're kind of insular, we're kind of self-segregated, and we're right to be that way because there's not a lot of us.
Yeah.
But now we got to get out. And so the younger generation was like, well, you guys, heal internally. We're going to get out and Serve to Unite. So service is a huge just component of Sikhism, and it's called seva. And so, 500 years ago, as Guru Nanak started to begin this faith that really talked about equality and oneness, right? So Sikhi basically means learning, and the ultimate learning, or the truth that you can come to, is your deep connection with God, and not just your connection, but everybody's connection. Yeah. And so seeing everyone in the eyes of God, and he started to kind of create this faith around equality, and started to give the same names to guys and girls, so you couldn't tell which gender. So gender neutral names would be the call. Then he started to rid the caste system. He started to make it deliberate for people to have to sit on the same levels. Right. And so there was a lot of deliberateness into what Guru Nanak was trying to do with the Sikh faith. And then one of the things that he started to say is like, so he was called service like the universal language that everyone knows. And it's like you might speak a different language, you might have a different faith, you might believe in a different type of God or entity, or even just background, but service is sort of the universal language that everybody knows. So if you can serve together, you can. So he started to call on all Sikhs to serve, but we had lost that by that time. A lot of us had lost our service and the need to be out there in community, not just not just behind sanctuary walls, but treat the world as your own sanctuary. Right. And so Surf United was formed out of that, and then over time started to kind of evolve to take on a lot of different issues within community and a lot of just different intersections, such as, segregation in Milwaukee. What does what economics and policies and criminal justice and all of these, like, as far as like around racism, around just treating people equally, and also a lot of the kids that we were working with started to take on a lot of these service projects. And what we wanted to teach them, and we didn't know this at the time, but coming back to seeing a lot of these kids who were suicidal and were just hurting themselves behind closed doors, we thought, if we can have kids take on an issue such as, let's say, environmentalism or bullying, but always stay solution focused and say, okay, here's the problem. And a lot of times when I do workshops, I'll ask people what problems exist. But basically they list hundreds of problems. And then I'm like, at the same time, I'm like, okay, what are solutions to those? And they might have 20 solutions.
Right.
So in a way, we become a society that has that kind of meditates on problems. And so we see ourselves, and sometimes that's because we see ourselves as a problem. We look in the mirror and we see the part in the mirror that we don't like much more than, the other 20 parts of our face that we do love. Right. So we've become that way. And then we saw these kids were becoming that way too. So we're like, okay, we want you to stay solution focused on this. Find a solution. So do a PSA, do it, do a service project, do something, right? Get out there and do something. And so they started to do all these things. And basically what we were doing was like kind of subtly taking on a mental health approach too, because we were like, if you can identify a problem and stay solution focused and solve some of societal problems, then maybe you can look in the mirror and solve your own problem or whatever's happening in your own life. And so, so a lot of that was like just this way around to say, okay, this organization is going to help you become much more solution focused in your own personal life.
And it makes you think just how important it is to just get out of our own like self-serving way. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that myself. It's just like how we are so inclined to protect ourselves. I mean, rightly so. I mean, we can only really take care of ourselves and how we react to things, but maybe past a certain point, you have to look to serving and charity and doing things with a growth mindset or a solution-based mindset, to not just help yourself, but to help your overall community. Because that's the only way. I mean, we're all going to grow anyway, right? Yeah. I wish this country could learn that as well, just to kind of get themselves out of their own heads, out of their own way, especially now, particularly now. I mean, it only behooves us to think about our neighbor as opposed to just ourselves.
Yeah, and it does. I think, thinking about 2020 and 2020 being sort of a nominal year of clarity would be like something that you would equate 2022, like 2022. And, I reflect a lot on what I hoped this year would be and to what this year became. And in a way, I think it's good for us. It's healthy for us. I think that we existed in a place where maybe a lot of this stuff was so kind of under the layers of different things that people weren't attuned to it. But now we understand, even masks are political. Even, public safety is political. Somebody's like, well, this is my right to do whatever I want. What happened to the communal right to like live? What happened to the communal good? So we have to really evaluate this country with sort of like this place of like, maybe we didn't nurture that. Maybe it's become so hyper individual that doesn't actually exist here. Maybe that exists in other places. And so they're doing a better job of like containing this. But now you have a president, and I'm not like trying to pick on, Donald Trump, but he is sort of the epitome of everything that is wrong and gross about this country.
Yeah.
I mean, the perversion of this country is embodied in a president. And sometimes you need to make things so like in your face that people are just so disgusted that we have to change.
Right.
So the vibration that happens within what is happening right now is to say, okay, like let's really reflect and be introspective, because you don't have anywhere to go.
Right.
You don't have things that you need to do. So now you need to sit your butt down and meditate and be like, what is going on?
Yeah.
What is really happening? And I think part of that is definitely, I mean, not to say anyone ever deserves to die from a pandemic or COVID-19 or anything like that, but part of it is, again, like that's an obstacle, and the opportunity to kind of learn from it and grow from it. And I think one of the first things that I kind of learned from it was like, when human activity is not happening, the earth can breathe better, right? I think early on we started to see in India and the Himalayas, all of the air pollution that was there started to kind of decrease because so many cars weren't on the road.
Right.
Like the irony of that, right? This COVID-19 was literally taking the breath out of people, right. But now because it did, the earth is able to breathe.
Absolutely.
Right? So we got a conflicting relationship with our planet.
Yeah.
This conflicting relationship, we are the cancer. We're what's causing it not to breathe.
Yeah.
So how do we get attuned to being not the cancer, but being the solution, not the problem, but being part of the healing culture that really heals it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, a lot of time we as humans, we are we like to think of ourselves as like the top of the food chain. Like we are invincible. A lot of people, they don't like to think about death either, because it conflicts with our self-empowering thing that we have with ourselves. But something like this, with this virus, and you can even look at it on a smaller level with like natural disasters, like things like that are very humbling. And it takes, I guess, a certain type of mind, kind of depending on where an individual is in their mindset, to be able to look at that as a humbling experience, and maybe take a step back and, like you're saying, just meditate, look inwardly, and think about like how am I contributing to all this negativity in the world, whether that's suffocating the planet, or that's spreading hatred, or however. I mean, I think overall, like I said, this is just an incredibly humbling experience that would definitely lead to a lot of people to take a step back.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, and let's say this experience doesn't happen, and let's say that we still go on, we take life for granted, and we're like, we don't sit and we don't become introspective. We don't have sort of a understanding of what we're doing to the planet. We got 7 billion plus people right now. We have limited resources. We're causing all of these issues that are happening. Maybe we were headed towards like driving ourselves off a cliff, where we couldn't return, right? We were going to enter the place of no return. But hopefully this creates and says, okay, you know what? This is the only planet that we have. We have to take care of it.
Right.
We have to make sure that we're not just so selfish that we're worried about our lifetimes, or we have to worry about future generations' lifetimes. Right. So I think in a way like that, if that happens, then we can look back and say, okay, there was some reason for it. Because I mean, when you think about pain and you think about purpose, right? Pain without purpose is pointless.
Right.
But purpose derived from pain is the most powerful. So let's derive some kind of purpose from what is going on right now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your message to our audience, to the students you've been, working with through life, and to us too, two of us? What's your message?
Yeah, if you could package like all the things that you've learned, all the wisdom, how would you present that? What would you say?
I would say always don't take life too seriously, but always be sincere. Does that make sense?
It does.
Laugh at yourself, laugh at one another. Don't ever lose that.
Oh.
All right. And I think there's, and then the other part of it is just, be yourself, because I think you can always try to be somebody else, but God created both of you to be in the divine spirit that you both are. And oftentimes when we want to do things and we want to accomplish things, and those are all healthy, they're all good, but to get anybody to a better place, you have to embody that same light, right? So sometimes, and this is just you being yourself. I would watch teachers sometimes do this, like not because they were trying to, but because Mondays used to be rough days when we used to come back to school, and oftentimes you would have a child and say, "Well, Miss so and so, how was your weekend?" And sometimes I would know that the teachers, before we talk, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I went out on Lake Michigan. We took the boat out. We had a good old time." That's what they were talking about, like that to me, right? Yeah. And then to this child, they might be like, "I was all right." And so, in a way, they dimmed the light way down.
Yeah.
And part of it was, I think that there was a part of them was like, "Oh, this child might not understand because this child is going through so much in their own life, and might not even understand being on a boat, or might not understand being on a, like this is an inner city child." Yeah. And I was like, I would tell them, like, "You had a great weekend. You were on a boat." And share your experience with this child. Like, don't dim yourself, because they might not understand, the difference between a sailboat and a motorboat and a 50-footer to a 70-footer or whatever what you were doing. Right. But they do understand joy. Right. Yeah. They do understand happiness and they do care about you as an educator, right? Because you see them all the time. Now, if you're happy, like, that is contagious.
Yes.
That is something that is like, well. Somebody's happy. You're like, man, that person is happy. That person is good. And what they're asking for is, I want some of that. And so people, so I think there's nothing too wise that I can say to you, but just to be yourself and then just embody that. I love both of your smiles. As I was able to, as you both were, Alex and Dydine, you both were talking. I'm like, wow, like, these are two young people that really have it together. That, I mean, they have it. They're there. So keep doing what you both are doing. I wish you guys all the luck in the world, blessings, and I hope that podcast goes super viral, and because this is what we need. We need stuff like this.
Right.
We need to spread the good. We need to, like, when we see it, we need to pump the brakes and say, that's where it's at.
Yes. This is the content that we need. Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do, and we're lucky to have guests like you. Yeah. I mean, because it's not only therapeutic for our audience or anybody who listens, but we learn. Like, our responses, we're like actively processing what you're saying. So it's always a blessing to be able to just consume as much positive wisdom and get to know people like you on a more intimate level.
Thank you, man. Alex, could I ask you for a favor?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the name of that book?
You know what? It's called Many Lives, Many Masters. Many Lives, Many Masters by, and I don't remember the man's name.
Brian W.
I think Weiss, Weiss. He it's a very popular book. It's one of the deans. She's the one who recommended it to me. And the guy Brian is a therapist out of Miami. I don't know his whole background, but it blew me away. It talks about spiritualism. It gets into like reincarnation, and he is in contact with, he gets wisdom from
this patient that he had. Yeah. And she gave him permission to write her story.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil anything for you, but
It's a very interesting book.
Potentially
That's
live
awesome. I'm gonna check it out. So yeah, you don't got to send it to me. I'm gonna go check it out now.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll follow.
Great.
Yeah, and if if ever something comes up and you want me to be back on again, I'd love.
Oh, really?
I would love to be back on again.
Oh, thank you so much.
Great.
That would be amazing.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
All right, Alex. Dydine,
All right.
you guys take care.
Say hi to Amarlise. Amarlise, right?
Oh yeah, Ambrose. She remembers you. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time and listen to Pardeep's interview and his wisdom. We hope you have questions or you have comments or just we're here to learn from one another. Yeah. So we can't wait to hear your feedback. We learned so much for sure.
Oh yeah, that was a tough one. That was a tough interview. Only because it wasn't like hard to talk about, but it was tough to like stay. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't tough. It was just it flowed so well.
It did flow
it wasn't
really
tough.
well.
Tough
it
is
wasn't.
Not the right word.
No, it was just
it was so organic and
it was, and it was almost like we had prepared questions for him, but because of the knowledge he was providing to us, it just felt like we had more questions today, and we kept asking. So it might be we always have long conversations.
Yeah.
But this one was really a needed interview.
I agree.
Yeah, especially during this time. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, guys, again, we hope you enjoyed the episode. And please stay tuned to the next episode.
Should we tease it a little bit?
You can. I'm not good at teasing.
Okay. Our second episode is going to be Andre Lavelle. Amazing human being. Wrote a wonderful blog back in 2005, 2006 for a couple years. And the blog's name, it really speaks volume, especially to what's happening right now. It's almost like, when those people just talk about things and they never age. The conversations they talk about, they're always relevant to what's happening.
Yeah.
So I feel like his blog and what he spoke about, Blaxplanation, it's really relevant to our days. So we can't wait for you for the next week. Next week we'll tell you more. Was that good? Did I tease you or did I give you all the whole information?
I feel like that was a lot of information.
Then cut it.
All right, guys. Well,
you're the editor.
Please stay tuned to the next episode.
I say a lot of smart things and you cast them out.
Not true. I mean, no. Anyway, bye, everybody. We'll see you guys in the next episode.
Yes, we'll see you next week. Mwah. Oh, yeah, no. Bye.